So, as Sarah mentioned earlier, I work in an educational service district, so I thought I'd give you just a little bit of background on what that is, because I was really surprised that not every state has them. I don't just assume they did. In Oregon, we have 19 different educational service districts, or ESDs, because we're in education, everything has to be an acronym. In each of those ESDs have a specific number of districts that they work with, and they're just assigned basically geographically. So in our region, we're in Willamette Valley in Oregon, and we have 21 districts that are assigned directly that we provide services for. And by law, there's 4 areas that we have to provide services for: school improvement, business administration, technology, and special ed. So we can provide other services, but we have to cover those areas for our district. And the purpose of it really is looking at, our districts range in size from fewer than 200 kids to over 40,000 kids. And if you're a big district of 40,000, you have the funds. All of our funding is based on the number of kids that you have in your district. So you have the funds to pay for a lot of things. If you only have 200 kids, you don't have a lot of money, and there's a lot of things you can't do. Even things like speech pathologists, you only need a couple hours a week. It's really hard to get somebody to come out to your district. It's out in the middle of nowhere. So one of the things of the ESD then is to just help offset the costs, especially for those smaller districts. How we're funded: we are a public agency. Technically, we're considered a school district, although we don't really have schools. But we received a certain percentage of our funding is based on how many kids we serve in our entire region. So that gives us some seed money. We also apply for different federal and state grants, and then we have contracts also. So when we started with our project, our early indicator system, we actually started in 2007, and early indicator system wasn't even in our minds at all. There was a statewide initiative called the Oregon Data Project, and it had 2 different purposes. The first one was teaching all our educators how to be data literate. So the data-driven decision making, and that initiative that went on several years ago. So that was part of the focus. And the other focus was, if we're going to teach people how to use data, they have to have access to data. So the flip side was the technology side, and that was the side that I got involved with. That how do we put the data into the hands of our educators? So when we started, it was pretty much just some basic things: enrollment demographics. We did look at attendance behavior and our state assessments. So it started fairly narrow, then it began to grow. So with our region, Oregon is a local control state, which means our districts have a lot of choice on what they do. They all get to pick their own student information system. So if you're in a state that all has the same student information system, life is much easier if you're trying to pull data. But if everybody's using a different system, and it just happened in our region, we had every system that was used in the state. So we brought in, we have 6 right now different systems that we're bringing data in for. And when we started off, the districts all agreed, we want to do this, so that got us our seed money to get going. And if you're going to go down this road, I want to just be very upfront with you in the fact, you don't turn this over in 1 year. It takes a while to build and get everything going. So we had a bit of a chicken and an egg situation. So here's the other thing to watch out for if you're building data systems is ideally, if you're building the system, you know what data you want in it to start with. So if you're learning how to use data and become data literate while you're building a system, it's really easy to diverge. And so you build this great system, but it's not really what people want. So I guess that's one of our first lessons learned was you really should know what you want when you build the system. So what happened, because we had these 21 districts all using different systems, is other people throughout the state who weren't big enough to build a system like this started coming to us and saying, hey, can we join yours? So we started to grow. And now we have about 90 districts in Oregon has about 190 school districts, and 90 of them work with our system. And it just kind of happened organically. So again, remember, we weren't focused on an early indicator system. We were just trying to provide data to people. But it just started to grow. People were like, hey. So we do work samples in Oregon. And you have to track them, and you have to, it's all information required by the state. And so they said, hey, could you build it in that system you have? Could you add tracking work samples? I said, sure. So then there was another thing. We have essential skills for graduation. Can you track those too? Sure. So it just started growing organically. And so now we have all these different areas that people have asked us for that we have in our system. And you can see we now have over 200 different charts and graphs and reports, which is a ton of data, and this gets into the drowning in data situation. But the other thing we found is with 90 school districts, they all want something different. And so we're trying to make everybody happy. So we decided we had to make it customizable, because what our district with 200 kids is focusing on is not the same thing our district with 40,000 kids is focusing on. So we did need to make it flexible that they could actually pick and choose what they want. So second thing you really should watch for is actually less is better. So even though we need to give them a lot of choice, we really try and get them to focus. Don't pick, just because you have 200 doesn't mean you have to look at all 200. Really focus on what works for your district. So then in 2015 we decided we wanted to do an early indicator system. And that's when we still, and I want to thank Sarah greatly, because it was her research that I largely looked at and said, oh great, Sarah's done all the background research for me, literature review, and I can just pull what she has. And Sarah was working with our state at that time too, because we were looking at not necessarily building a statewide system, but what would all it encompass. So when we did this, because we have the 96 different schools, and again, we're local control, different schools were focusing on different models to identify kids at risk. Some of ours were using what was done with the University of Chicago. Others were more focused on attendance. Some were focused on using all three of the ABCs. So it really varied, and so we knew we had to be flexible and let people choose. So we built that in, and we knew that they wouldn't all be looking at the same type of indicators. And they wouldn't necessarily have the same thresholds for those indicators to determine who's at risk. So we knew we had to be really flexible with this. So what we did, looked at the research, and so for attendance it's pretty clear cut. Almost everybody uses that 90% cutoff. Our state uses a 90% cutoff. And the other thing about Oregon, being local control, the state doesn't tell us how to do things. Sometimes they tell us things like, you're chronically absent if you're missing 90% or more of school, or excuse me, if you're attending 90% or less of school. But they don't tell us how to fix that. They tell us you're not on track to graduate if as a freshman you haven't earned a quarter of your credits, but again, they're not telling anybody how to track it. So there's a lot of variety there that we need to address. So behavior, typically number of incidents or suspensions, expulsions, and then the C, course performance. This is where it's all over the board. And we knew all our districts were going to want something different. So we provided the opportunity that they could have all this mix and match of what they wanted. And again, they can choose what their thresholds are. We highly recommend they limit what they choose. If you're going to look at courses, are you going to look at credits, strictly? Are you going to look at your grades? And you can look at them, but we recommend they don't use them all to identify the kids that are at risk. So this is great if you're in high school, and works pretty good except for credits if you're in middle school. But our elementaries don't grade. So and remember, we're doing a K-12 system because, as Alice mentioned, not an elementary. No, it's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a proficiency base. They do not award grades. Occasionally you'll get grades, but so I should say they're token grades. They're given, but they're not really counted for anything. It's really looking at what is your student master doing when you're in elementary. So we couldn't use the A through F grading system. So what we did there is we looked at formative assessments. So Oregon is really big on formative assessments, and these are all third-party vendors, but of course everybody's using something different. They kind of all use the same thing. So what we did is we actually just got agreements with the vendor to bring everything in. Everything we bring in is all automated for the most part. Nobody in a district's having to load anything. So here's the other lesson learned too. The thing that's come out. If you're going to build your own system, the more automated it is, the more likely you'll be successful. Because if people are manually having to load data, it's really difficult to get that done on a consistent routine. So that's another thing I would say. If you're building a system, look for automating as much as possible. 2 minutes, okay. Other things we included was our state assessments. Research really doesn't say that makes a difference, but we knew our district would ask for it, so we included it. And our state now is really going for social and emotional learning, and there's another initiative we have in our region to use the Deborah data. So our indicator system, we want to make it simple for people to look at. They can just see the chart. They can click on that, drill down to get the student data. So that's great, you've identified the kid, but why do they have a problem in attendance? So we actually have additional student level metrics and student profiles that they can actually dive in and look at the data and say, oh, I can see why the kid's missing school. They're sick a lot, or they're always on vacation, or they're always missing on Friday. And actually, I can see that historically they've had a problem. So that was the thing, is you not only need to look at aggregate and get a list, you really need the ability to be able to dig deeper and find out why. And then the other thing we found is you can build the best system in the world, but it doesn't mean people are going to use it. And so a couple years ago, we moved our system from technology into our research center, and we team with a variety of data analysts and researchers. And this is really that reach out to your districts and teaching them and to talk to them about why they should use it and how it's beneficial in doing that deeper dive. And then just quickly, our next steps, because we do have all this data, is looking at doing some predictive analytics so that they can just have those metrics and say, as I set my goals, what's a reasonable goal? So I'm not just picking a number out of the air. I'm saying I can see by my past trends and with our interventions, this would be a good goal to set. And then along with that, the intervention tracking, so we can tie all the data with what they're doing so that they can see if what they're doing is making a difference. Wow, and that was like 17 years of working in just a few minutes.